Hi, my name is Scott, and I'm an editor. Hi, Scott, right. This is Stu Bass, governor. I'm governor as well. So without further ado, I'm going to start with Skip McDonald, Ace, who's nominated for Outstanding Single Camera Picture Editing for the miniseries or movie for Fargo. Skip is very talented. He has 2 nominations this year, one for Fargo, also one for Breaking Bad. Chris McCaleb, nominated for Outstanding Single Camera Picture Editing for a drama series, shares his nomination with Kelly Dixon down in the front row. Shannon Mitchell, Ace, nominated for Outstanding Single Camera Picture Editing for a comedy series, Orange is the New Black. This is her first Emmy nomination. Representing Outstanding Multiple Camera Picture Editing for a comedy series is Jason Bielski. For Jimmy Kimmel Live, he shares the nomination with James Crow, Brian Marsh, Kevin McConnell, and Matt Williams. Kent Beta Ace is nominated for Outstanding Picture Editing for short-form segments and variety specials. Emily Swan, been nominated for Outstanding Picture Editing for a reality program, Naked and Afraid. She shares this nomination with Chris Meyer and Edward Osegima. This is Emily's 3rd nomination. John Duffy, Ace, nominated for Outstanding Picture Editing for nonfiction programming for Cosmos. He shares his nomination with Michael O'Halloran and Eric Lee. This is his 3rd nomination. So to introduce Fred Savage, Stu Bass.
Back in '89, I was working on The Wonder Years. The star of the show was a very inquisitive kid. I mean, I remember him climbing on the camera dollies, and he was always talking to camera people. And I had a Nintendo game up in my editing room, and the whole cast was up there playing all the time. And Fred was there, and he was really not that interested in the Nintendo. He was asking me questions about the editing system. We were nonlinear back there in '89 even. And I could see then that he was going to go on to bigger and better things. He's now one of the top episodic directors. He's directed shows like Modern Family, Two Broke Girls, The Crazy Ones. He's directed over 100 episodes of both dramatic and comedy. And he's got 4 DGA nominations at this point, with more to come. Ladies and gentlemen, Fred Savage.
Well, thank you guys for having me, and thank you to the PGC for inviting me. This is very exciting. I have been in awe of and intimidated by many editors. And I feel like coming here today, I was very excited to be part of it, but it's also kind of a down payment on the future that if I'm in an editing bay with any of you guys, it'd be really nice to me. As an actor and as a director, I've been saved many times, and I value what you guys do so much, and am always amazed at the alchemy that you guys can put together and make something really come to life. So thank you for having me, and congratulations to you guys. It's a very exciting, there's a tremendous breadth of editing styles and entertainment styles, so I want to try and get to it all. But first, I just wanted to, I think the path to any career in show business is really interesting and circuitous. And I know some of you guys studied it in school, some of you were born into it, others just stumbled into it. And so I wonder if you guys could tell me a little bit of how you got started. Skip, you want to start and just tell us I know you have a long background in show business.
Long background, but my father was an editor, so I kind of followed in his footsteps. You know, I'd go to the cutting room with him when I was a kid and just watch what he did, and I was interested in it. So over the years, as I got older, he worked me in and got into it. I started in sound effects, did sound effects work for a few years, and then I moved over to picture editing.
And did you start as an AE like with him, or did he like?
He got me in with a friend of his, so I did work with him a couple times, but I always felt working with him, I worked twice as hard as anybody.
You gained a lot of experience and a lot of knowledge as an assistant.
Yes.
How many years did you assist?
I probably assisted about 5 or 6 years in sound effects work and probably about 10 years in picture. Mm-hmm. So I spent a lot of time, I did features for a while, and then I moved over into television. So I worked with a variety of editors and got a lot of different styles from working with different people.
And do you think that's important? I mean, we'll touch on this with everybody, but do you think, I feel like all of you in some way or another have kind of dabbled in a lot of different styles and before you ended up where you guys are today. Do you feel like that's important as an assistant in particular to kind of expose yourself to a variety of styles and stories?
Yeah, because when you do start cutting, at least you have a place to go. If something's not working for you, you can try something else, and you know, have worked with other people you see their style, so you try to include that into what you do.
What was your first break as an editor? Was it someone you assisted, gave you some stuff to cut and pulled you up, or what was that next step for you?
Yeah, usually it was editors would give you scenes to cut, and I happened to be working on Buffy the Vampire Slayer, and one of the editors left to go do a movie of the week, and the editor I was working with said, move Skip up. So that's where I got my first big break.
And how far into the run was that?
It was in the first season.
Oh, wow.
So I got very lucky into the first season and was on it for 4 seasons.
Did you edit from then on, or did you go back to assisting?
Went back to assisting a little bit because usually the second job is the hardest one to get.
Yeah.
So in the meantime, you do some assisting work and hopefully get another break, and you keep knocking on the doors to say, I want to edit, and finally you get that next break, and then after that second one, then you pretty much can stay with it.
And as an editor now, do you look to pull your AEs up as well? Do you try and give them those opportunities?
Yeah, I want them to cut scenes. I like to sit back and show them what to do, and then once they cut a scene, I'll sit back and watch it, and then I'll give them my thoughts and notes and stuff on it to improve what they're doing.
Chris, you're a great example of someone who started as an AE and really got pulled up and to great success.
Oh yeah, on the right show.
Yeah.
To get pulled up on, absolutely.
How long had you been assisting? Had you been working with Kelly for a long time?
Not really. We've known each other since 2010. I worked for Michael Mann for many, many years, and then took a long time not working for Michael Mann, doing original stuff for the internet. And then I was broke and didn't have health insurance, and went back to work. And we met on that. It was like just the right place at the right time in a very chaotic environment on the pilot of Luck, the HBO series. And Kelly was the last editor standing, really. She survived the kind of the maelstrom, and we just, over the years, she would recommend me for jobs that things never worked out. And then, so we'd been working together. She called me to do this ABC series, Red Widow. And she said, I can't take you to Breaking Bad. I already have an assistant. Sorry, this is a short gig. And then while we were on Red Widow, her assistant for Breaking Bad retired. And he's just like, he's retiring. He's ready to do that. And so she called me and she said, okay, you ready to go to the big show and work on your favorite show on TV? And I told her, I did actually have to think about it for maybe 5-10 seconds.
Right.
But I was like, oh no, now I can't watch the last season of Breaking Bad because you'll be in it. So you can't really watch it, objectively.
It'll ruin. You'll know how it ends.
Oh yeah, you'll know how, and you'll know everything, and but yeah, it was an easy decision to make, and I actually found it really a very different experience because the material's so rich. It was like bathing in Breaking Bad, which maybe that seems gross, but
yeah.
I don't know.
How long did you assist before you started cutting on your own?
I've been very lucky in my life that I've had really good mentors, and Kelly is an extraordinary mentor. And she would give me scenes to cut, but even on Red Widow, I cut a fair number of scenes, and then we'd start building up to, cutting a whole act, and then beyond. But on Breaking Bad, she was like, all right, let's make sure you're ready for the big leagues. And she would give me scenes from the past season.
Oh, and give you the raw footage and say what we...
And she said, don't look at what I did. I'm gonna see what you do. And she would give me scenes that were, maybe there was a problem that had to be solved, that the material, there was something about it that had to make it work in a way that it didn't. And she was just basically testing me to see if I could sort of find a creative solution. And once she trusted me, she would give me more scenes to do, and then eventually we were, cutting. I was cutting half the episode, and we were cutting together. It's a really great working relationship.
And then the path to being editor. I know they mentioned when they were introducing you, you've done, you've executive produced and created shows, you've starred in shows, you've directed shows, you've written shows. Is editing just a path that you kind of fell into and are going to continue on down now, or how did you come to be an editor? After experiencing everything, did you say, oh, that's my favorite one, or was that kind of, Kelly did that and she said, come work with me, and you were broke?
It's interesting. Yes.
I mean, that's
broke.
good too.
You think that I would not be broke anymore?
Right,
I don't
right.
understand. No, some of my first jobs out of film school were in editorial. I was lucky enough to work on a John Sayles movie as an editing PA, but I learned, because they cut on film, so I learned popping tracks and trim tabs and all that stuff. Code machines, yuck. I'm sure some people remember code machines and the smell of that toxic, gross stuff. And then my first great mentor was a guy named Brian Carroll, and he used to be an editor and an assistant editor for a really long time, and then he fell into the Michael Mann camp, and he was producing for Michael. He was like his post-producer. Michael relies very heavily on his editing team. They're always on in pre-production, just managing all of the data and the workflow. It's pretty intensive. And so he saw that I had worked on film, and he said, all right, you're hired. But he made me call, as a PA, and he made me call a PA who had just gotten off the movie Ali, and said, I just need you to know what you're getting into. He said, so don't say yes now, call this guy, see what you can do. And the guy said, yeah, it's terrible. It's terrible, but you should take this job. And it was really hard, really, really hard, but I just kept working my way up and just showing that I would work harder than anybody else, and eventually, I worked on Collateral, I worked on Miami Vice, the movie, went all around the world on that one as an assistant editor. It was crazy.
But I would imagine working for someone that exacting so early on in your career really was, I'm sure, difficult but beneficial ultimately.
Oh yeah, and you learn. I mean, you really learn what to do and also what not to do, or how not. You learn a lot of things from Michael Mann and from a world-class filmmaker like that. But then after Miami Vice, I took sort of a detour. Yeah, and I was with 3 other friends started a company called Big Fantastic, and we were making original dramas mostly for the internet. And we had a lot of success, and then the economy kind of changed, and then we had less. What we were doing was, I think, too expensive for the economy of it. But on that stuff, I was editing all the things that I was directing and writing and producing and sometimes shooting. I was cutting all of that, and I was often cutting some of my partners' things as well. So I really learned how to solve problems creatively, editing, and got just tons of field experience actually doing it. And then going back to assisting, I've been lucky to have worked with especially with Kelly, who has believed in me and given me the opportunity to cut.
Shannon, how about you starting? Was it born into it, or a way out of an alternative to ramen? What was your journey?
I kind of just fell into it, totally different. I started at the National Film Board, and was syncing 16 millimeter dailies for documentaries on wheat and stuff like that. And I don't know, as soon as I walked in an editing room, I just loved it. I took communication arts, so I really liked radio, TV, writing, and I'm also a visual person, and I like painting and stuff. So it sort of all came together very quickly. And so I did that for quite a few years, and then I was in Vancouver, and suddenly all these American shows were coming up, and they needed people to sync dailies on features and stuff like that. So we were just trained really fast, and they had to use Canadians, and we just did that a lot. And then finally, I don't know, I would get to edit some things at the National Film Board, but basically I started editing people's independent movies myself, but always while I was assisting. I think I assisted probably about 12 years on and off.
And would you look for those opportunities to edit films just to be cutting something, to be training yourself?
Yeah, and even when I came down here on a permit on a Dino De Laurentiis feature, as a first assistant, and I would always, I guess, edit at night. Like it was even the shows that I did after that, when I would work on a lot of TV movies, and I'd work for half a day as fast as I could and wait till the editor left and then cut somebody's movie at night till about 3 in the morning. So that's how, until I got enough credits that it looked like I'd cut a bunch of indie features, and then I could go out and start flogging it myself for that. So that's how I did it.
And would you use that as kind of a reel for yourself?
Yes, yeah. Yeah.
It's a good. That's a great point. Like for people starting out or at the beginnings of their career, if they're not on a show or if they're assisting, what can people do to start building that reel? Do you they should just find stuff to edit? How would you find those movies?
I was so clueless that I would actually go through like the Hollywood Reporter and cold call people who had their little films listed. And I got some jobs that way, believe it or not.
That's amazing. That's amazing.
Crazy. I mean, but I did have to keep assisting to make money for a long time. But then finally, like you get that one job, it was at Showtime. This one director, I think probably he just like my credits were just all these little indie nothing things that he'd ever seen. And he hired me to edit a TV movie for, when they were doing, Showtime was doing them back around 2000. And after that, I could get jobs. It was like the first.
Was that the first one?
Credit.
That was like your first being hired as an editor on your own?
Yeah, and on sort of a legitimate credit that somebody might recognize someday for a
Right.
Then for my then I didn't have any TV credits, TV series credits. So when independent movies kind of lapsed for a while, then I went into reality TV for a couple of years, and I had a blast doing that. That was really fun. But all of a sudden, I got a chance, through MTV to cut a pilot for them in New York. And then I got a call on my way. When I was in New York, I got a call from Showtime after all these years, and they said, hey, we've got a pilot that we'd like you to recut. Could you do it? And it was like, I would have killed to do it. And I was in New York, and I couldn't do it. So when the people at MTV were driving me from the airport in LA back home, in their little sedan, I got another call, and the other guy had dropped out. And he said, can you come and work all weekend for Showtime and cut this pilot? And I did, and that ended up being Californication. So I ended up, that was it. After that, I could work on series, for 7 seasons.
That's amazing.
But it's weird how you never can turn down anything because you don't know how it's gonna all fall into place.
I love the cold calling. When I
yeah.
saw it, I mean, that's great. I mean, you just have to. That's awesome. And I think that's hard as an editor starting because it's not like a writer needs a pen and a paper and they can write anything. You know what I mean? But an editor needs something to edit. So to find those opportunities to find footage to cut, that's great. Mm-hmm. Jason. Was editing something you always wanted to do, or I feel like it's something you kind of stumbled into after college?
Yeah, I kind of stumbled into it. I was at NYU and was 3 years in and realized that I didn't have enough money for a 4th year. And thanks to the magic of AP credits, just needed like 5 more credits. And
Hunger seems like a powerful motivator, I think.
Yeah, pretty much. And at NYU, you kind of went 2 routes. It was either you had a lot of money to do your thesis film, or you use their internship program. And, that was like 89 into 90. So I had a choice of like 2 or 3 different internships. So it was like The Cosby Show, Entertainment Tonight, which they told me like, well, you can intern here. It's all union. You can't touch anything. You'll just be in the office. I'm like, well. And then it was the Jim Henson Company. So they had just, at that point, Jim Henson had just passed away. And they were doing a tribute special to him. So they're like, you're going to hit the ground running and start working. So I started working for them and was just doing like dubs and, PAing and on the set working, moving monitors and as like an A2 for them. Just basically, it was all hands on deck. And then I got to the end of that semester and I had these 5 credits left. And I'm like, all right, well, can I just stick around? And they said, sure. And then at the end of that, I got my degree a year earlier. And they're like, well, do you want to just stay? And so I started as a dub guy and also, doing storage and distribution. But then in between, like every 6 months, there would be a series that would come up and I would start assisting, the editor/director that was on staff there. And then eventually, a couple years later, we're doing this show and they're like, oh, do you want to cut the segments for this show? So I kind of just fell into editing for the Jim Henson Company, but it was a great experience because it was such a small company Even with that, the big reputation, the big cachet, I mean, the production part was just a small group. It was like, all right, do you want to, we're doing this pitch for Good Morning America. Do you want to direct it? I'm like, all right, sure. Or do you want to do, we've got this small, little home video. Do you want to be, you're going to edit it, but you're also going to be the audio supervisor. So you're going to finish editing and then go over to the sound house and do all the sound supervision. And we're re-releasing the Muppet movie. Can you go to this telecine session and do all the color timing on that? So it was like.
So you guys would do everything. You were just.
Yeah.
They
and I ended up
put you where they
staying there.
needed you.
Yeah, I ended up staying there for 12 years. So,
Wow.
So yeah, doing all different things, all different jobs, post supervisor, director, assistant editor, editor, whatever, until they moved me out here in like 2000, and then moved on.
And wearing all those different hats, and experiencing all those different departments, did it solidify your commitment? Do you I really love cutting? I love cutting pictures. Did you gravitate towards that then?
Yeah, it was always the problem-solving nature of it, especially with something like, at the Henson with the Muppets. It's like, because you're not only just dealing with your standard set of issues of editing a scene, you're dealing with the challenges of okay, I can only show this from the waist up, or I've got to figure out how to make it seem like this character is holding something and then throwing it and then catching, it's like when there's no live hands, it's just, a little thing on a rod going like this. I think one of the biggest challenges, when we were doing that show Dog City 20 years ago, the executive producer came up and he's like, we want to do a scene, we want the puppet to jump rope. I'm like, yeah, I don't think we can do that. And so we kept trying to think, they ended up cutting it, but we spent a lot of time trying to figure out how to, there was no major budget for effects or green screen or doing full body puppets. No, you just can't get a puppet won't jump rope. They have no legs. But but the problem-solving nature of editing and post is definitely, it's the best training you have to do anything else. It helped when whenever I've directed stuff, whenever I've done anything else, it's like you just keep your eye on, all right, how is this going to go together at the end, and as an editor. So you can be a lot more economical with what you shoot. You can be a lot more, economical when you're in a sound session. You just know what the end result needs to be, and you can get there a lot quicker being an editor.
And then puppets took you to Jimmy.
Strangely, they did. The Henson Company got smaller, and they downsized, and I was let go. But and then some of the puppeteers that summer, in 2002, were working on Crank Yankers for Jimmy Kimmel, and so they're like, oh, they need some editors. So I'm like, all right, great. I went and applied, and met with the producer, and they're immediately well, we've got to hire you. You're the puppet guy. I'm like, great. Let me get a card. Puppet guy. So yeah, for the course of 6 months, we did 32 episodes of Crank Yankers, and after that, about 2 or 3 months later, of just doing various little freelance gigs here and there, Jimmy Kimmel Live had started. It was about 8 months into the show, and early on, they just had one editor for the live show. And then I think maybe they went up to 2, but they decided they wanted to make a change of the whole editing staff, so they brought in 3 new guys about 8 months into the show, and it was 100% live. So you were essentially running towards a finish line every single day of trying to get something done. And then, so Muppets to Crank Yankers to Kimmel.
And I wanted to just ask you about working on Jimmy Kimmel. We were talking about it just a little bit before it started. And doing a show like that, a daily show, feels almost like working in a newspaper. I feel like you come in every day with nothing. You come in well, what are we doing today? Is that the case? Or are there projects that you're working on that take more time? Obviously the special took more time. But when you're doing day-to-day at Jimmy Kimmel, are you walking in with starting at 0 each morning?
Some days you are. We shoot a lot of bits that are long lead. Jimmy will send it. Jimmy will do bits on our dark days and go do stuff, and he'll send his aunt or his cousin. We'll shoot hidden cameras. It's a mix of all variety of stuff. Our big Oscar bits are shot over the movie I did a couple years ago was shot over the course of months, just as people were available. Either they came in to do the show as a guest and we'd grab them for half an hour afterwards to do something. But in most cases, the show kind of is, it's start over from square one that morning. Jimmy will get submissions from the writers. He and his staff will kind of cull through it and be all right, here's what we're doing. Here's our outline of the day. Here's what he's approving as potential bits for that day. And then it's sort of, I think I was telling Skip earlier, it's like a finite bucket of minutes you have until the show starts. And it's all broken up, not just to post, but just everything from the script writing process to then casting to then our costumers sometimes have to come up with the most ridiculous costumes, you know? And then the amount of time that's left, that's post.
And that always gets squeezed, I'm sure.
No matter what.
Yeah.
So-
And with that compressed amount of time, I would imagine that it forces you, I mean, you can't be precious. It really forces you to trust your instincts, I would imagine.
Yeah, it's usually, I mean, the best part I think about doing that show every day is that what I feel is like, and what I've learned over the years is that your first instinct is always your best instinct, and just go for it, and just, you know. And the good part about working on our show is that you don't have to worry about how stupid it's going to be. Just you can throw it out there, and you know, it's a great collaborative team of the writers and the directors. So you can throw dumb ideas out there, and you know, it oftentimes sticks. So we all work together in concert to get the show done. And I think another thing that's really great about doing a live show every day is that there's not a very lengthy notes process because there can't be. You know, we get the bit, we get it cut as fast as we can. We usually just, you know, export it and send it up to Jimmy to take a look at it. Our directors will go up, get a couple of quick notes, and depending on the amount of time, you know, you'll either do those quick notes and then ship it, you're done, or maybe you get one pass of notes. But it's not like, you know, back in the days of Henson working on very long lead shows that were on like Nickelodeon or Disney Channel. It's like you'll do the director's cut, the producer's cut, like everyone else does, where you're going to get network notes and.
There's a tremendous amount of autonomy. You're not doing rounds and rounds of notes.
Yeah, so it's great. It's like, so you get it immediate. You know, there's an immediate gratification too. So you'll know how well the bit does sometime within 5-10 minutes after you finish it.
That's terrifying. Kent, when you began, I mean, you mostly came from features, doing features, and so did you? How did you start out when you began?
I grew up on the East Coast. I went to film school in Boston, and then made my own movies. And I realized that editing was what I wanted to focus on. And I eventually took the plunge and moved to LA, because this is where the jobs were. And I didn't know a soul here.
Oh my gosh! So you came looking for, there wasn't a gig, there wasn't a relationship.
No.
You just came like, this is where they make movies, so I'm gonna come to LA.
Yeah.
Man.
My mother had gone to high school with Jenna Rollins,
Okay.
who was married to John Cassavetes at the time, and she invited me up to the house for lunch. It was really nice, and they were going to be starting a movie sometime. So I was working at a record store, and I found out they were filming. So I started going down to the set and hanging out, and eventually I got hired and as a set PA. And one time they needed some camera reports sent to the editing room. So I went to the editing room, and they were in a crunch with dailies, and they asked me if I knew how to sync up dailies, and I said I'd done it in 16 millimeter. So they gave me a quick 35 millimeter rundown and said, go. And so at that point, I started going to the editing room every day, and that's that. And then so I was delivering, the PA, I was sort of going from the set to the editing room. I was delivering film at the lab one night, and I heard this woman say, this is for Roger Corman. Oh. And I was like, oh, they make a lot of movies. So I struck up a conversation with her. She invited me down to the cutting room, and I found out they were starting a movie called Rock and Roll High School. I was just finishing up with John, and over a period of months, I was just haunting them down at Roger's company, New World. Eventually, they hired me.
Just saying, like, I'm available. What
Yeah.
can I do? How can I help? What do you need?
That's right. Well, eventually they hired me as an assistant editor on Rock and Roll High School, and from that group, I met a lot of people that I'm friends with to this day. The director, Alan Arkush, went on to direct a movie called Get Crazy, which was kind of based on his experiences as an usher at the Fillmore East in New York. It takes place on New Year's Eve at this rock and roll palace, and it's a super zany comedy. And I got to work on that as an assistant editor with the proviso that if they needed another editor, that I would get bumped up. And that's what happened. And I ended up editing on the movie, had a great time. And that's sort of what led to Spinal Tap, because that was another rock and roll comedy. They were looking for an editor who knew, you know, rock and roll and could cut musical numbers. And so I interviewed for that, and I got the job. And you know, I'm here because of Billy Crystal. And I met Billy through Rob Reiner, who directed Spinal Tap. So there you go.
That's amazing. That's incredible. He didn't hold it against you. I know he was cut out of Spinal Tap quite a bit. He got over that? Oh, okay,
yeah.
Billy did?
I mean, we had our first cut on Spinal Tap was 6 hours long. Now it's 85 minutes.
I was really interested in, specifically on 700 Sundays, just your creative approach, because it's more than just a live show. I mean, this is a performance, that's
Yes.
meant to be enjoyed for audiences, live audiences. Was your approach in cutting it, or when you guys were shooting it, to capture the experience of watching it, or to kind of create your own experience?
No, it was to create our own experience. Yeah,
Because like the close-ups, for example, were amazing in that clip,
Yeah.
and you can't experience that in the theater.
and we recognized early on that it was going to be a completely different experience from coming to see it in the theater. As a matter of fact, we had a little premiere for it, and a bunch of people that had seen it in the theater a number of times said to me, this is the best experience I've had of this show. And I think it's because of the ability to focus on those moments, the close-ups, and just to be right in there for those, really important moments. It's a very funny show. It's also a very emotional show. It's based on his, growing up and his family, and it's very personal to him. And on Broadway, it ran over 2 hours, and we knew we had to get it down, because you're not in the theater. It's a whole different experience. You're sitting at home on your couch, and it's just doesn't have that theater thing. So it became a much more intimate kind of experience on TV, I think. And we definitely approached the editing with that in mind. Yeah.
And did you, were you able to capture all that with an audience, or did you pick up some moments, or how did you put it all together?
There were 2 performances. There was a Friday night performance and a Saturday matinee. They were filmed with 9 cameras. And then they did some pickups on the stage with a Steadicam without the audience there, just to get some of the, moving camera and some of the sort of more intimate things.
And was that stuff that you would, did you determine between the Friday and Saturday show, we need this coverage, or was that always part of the plan?
No, it wasn't really about coverage. It was about the performance. And everybody decided that the Saturday show was better, so we based it on that. So I did a cut of the Saturday show, and then looked at the Friday coverage and started sort of dropping things in, and then went back to the Steadicam coverage and started putting that in. There was also some framing footage that they shot, which we integrated. So that was kind of the process, yeah.
Was it difficult, I guess, sound editing that, when you were just cutting the sound initially
It
to
was
bridge that
challenging.
audience laughter?
Well, Elaine said also there was live music on the stage that was, there in his mic, and it was everywhere, and you couldn't get rid of it. So, it was a little bit of a challenge cutting between nights when the music was different, So, but it all worked out.
And I also want to ask, you were talking about the how much footage you had on Spinal Tap, or how much footage you get on a feature. You have a tremendous amount of footage. Here was a very, two shows worth of footage, so not much. And so how would you fill or bridge gaps or help cover edits? You had nowhere to go. You just had to go from Billy to Billy to Billy to Billy.
Yeah, we had no audience coverage, unfortunately. And, Billy is extremely consistent as a performer. From performance to performance, he's pretty much matching, and, the lines can be different because he's improvising some. But, sometimes there's a word or a line or something, you just change angles, and it usually worked out pretty well.
But was that difficult working with so little material?
It was challenging. It was different for me. I've never done anything like that before. But the quality of the performance was so good that it was almost a no-brainer, you know what I mean? It was just you can almost do no wrong, because instinctually, you just kind of knew where to go, Basically follow him. Where he's looking, what he's emphasizing, that's where you want to be. So, yeah.
And one last question. When you were cutting for time, was it, he'd been doing it, I saw the show years ago, and he's been doing it for many years.
Yeah.
Was there, you being relatively fresh eyes to the project, was that helpful? Was he very precious about, I've been doing it this way for 10 years, like when you were cutting time, for example? Was it hard to break him of doing it for so long?
We had a long show at first, and I saw right away a couple of big lists we could make. And I knew that it was going to be a little bit challenging. He's not precious, but he's very close to the material.
Right.
He wrote it, it's his life, and and it's all good. So, yeah, I mentioned it to Des, the director, and he was like, "You want to tell him? Go ahead." Okay? So it was basically the 3 of us in this whole process, in the room. And so I said, "I got an idea for a lift. I'm just saying it. We don't have to do it." He said, "What?" And he's like, "You could go from, X to X, and I think it would be pretty seamless, and I know we'd lose this great scene, but, you know, we need to lose some time. And he was like, yeah, that could work. So then, like 5 minutes later, I'm going to the bathroom, and Des, the director, comes up to me in the hallway, and he grabs me, and he goes, we've been working on him for 10 years to make that lift.
Was the director of the play who directed the
Yes.
special?
Yeah, yeah.
That's great.
Yeah.
Emily, how did you begin? Were you always in reality and documentary?
Well, no, I actually had a whole other career before I started doing this. Back in 1990, I think I finished film school, and at film school I discovered my love of documentary and specifically editing, and how, you know, what an important role the editor had in terms of finding the footage and really telling a story. And I really fell in love with that, but I didn't want to move to LA, and I went home, which was San Francisco, and there's actually a fairly thriving documentary community up there, but it was very difficult to make any money. You know, most of the jobs I would get were not paid, and so I did work on a number of documentaries as an assistant editor, kind of in my spare time, just, you know, to keep doing it and to get experience. But I ended up being involved in the tech industry, and I worked in that as a project manager, actually, on some pretty big technology projects for 13 years. But again, I would always do things on the side. And
Would you be cutting stuff on the side?
I would cut stuff on the side.
And what would those projects be? How would you find those projects?
Just, there was a community called Film Arts Foundation, and I would find things listed there, basically. Even the company I worked for, they needed some corporate documentaries, or not documentaries, corporate videos done, and somehow I convinced them to let me direct and edit them.
Oh, wow.
So,
like industrial films?
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. So, and they did a lot of those, so I did those for a while. But then in about 2000 and early 2000s, you know, the industry just really tanked up there, and it was, you know, I got laid off from 2 jobs in a row, actually. And I had always wanted, it was kind of this thing that always gnawed at me, like I just felt I hadn't really tried to make it as an editor, and I really wanted to. So I just, in 2003, I just finally decided that it was my time to come down here and try things, so I moved, and within 6 weeks of getting here, I had landed a job at a reality TV company.
And did you come knowing you wanted to commit to editing? You
Yeah.
loved it, you enjoyed it?
Yeah, and I think one of the advantages perhaps that I had, as opposed to some of my peers in finding work quickly and advancing quickly and, you know, keeping working, was that I was really focused. I knew exactly what I wanted to do. I wanted to work. I knew reality was booming at that time, and so I really wanted to me, I know people will disagree, but to me there was a correlation between documentary editing and reality editing. You know, a lot of the similar types of techniques and such are used, so I wanted to really focus on that because I knew there was paying work, and so that's what I did. And so I started out, I actually, my first job was as a night logger at Rocket Science, which used to be a big reality company. And within a couple of weeks, I was promoted to an assistant editor. And then I worked on a couple of shows, I think for a year and a half as an AE. I did like Biggest Loser, Extreme Home Makeover. Those were, you know, fairly big shows. And I would always, I don't know how they knew, but somehow I guess I let them know, but you know, I sort of would let people know I wanted to cut, and so on Extreme Home Makeover, for example, I was there as a night AE, and you know, you don't really have a lot of interaction necessarily with editors or with producers.
And what does that entail? Are you just kind of
you're digitizing, you're basically inputting footage and you're grouping it, because in reality there's
so
tons
much
of
material.
cameras.
Oh, yeah.
So that's basically, you do that all night long. Yeah.
Wow.
But somehow they knew, and so I got my first, you know, official editing thing that I got to do was one of the talent on Extreme Home Makeover was going to be on one of the talk shows, and they needed just a little reel done of his work, and so I put that together. And then on Biggest Loser, I did a few things, and then somehow I landed, I think, well, what's interesting about it too, which I did want to mention, is that even as a night AE where I wasn't really interacting with the people who promote and give jobs and so on and so forth, I would get recommended by editors who, like, I had barely met, you know, who worked during the day, and you know, a lot of them were really generous in terms of just giving my name, and I would get hired, and so it's kind of interesting to think about, you know, the people that you don't know who are necessarily noticing or watching, and just all kinds of people are very generous and will, you know, give your name, and all of a sudden you have another job and you're advancing your career.
You just made, like, they would get to work and their day would be made easier by the great work you did overnight.
I guess. I mean, I guess so.
Yeah.
But so, yeah, one of my co-AEs, actually, she was going on to edit something, and she recommended me to be oh, and the other thing I did want to mention is I always took a copy of whatever I cut. So I was building a reel.
Right.
Because in the early days, you have to have a reel. And it, you know, wasn't the greatest reel, but I would just grab everything and put it on and show it to people. So, yeah, so I started out, I got my first kind of bigger actual editing break was at 51 Minds, where I became their tease editor, and I did all the tease and promos.
Is that like previously on
Yeah,
kind of thing?
previously ons and coming up and all that good stuff for the 51 Minds shows, which were like Flavor of Love, Surreal Life, and those things, which are really fun to do. And then, yeah, I just, from there, just kind of kept getting jobs and editing. So, yeah.
And do you find that the experience you had outside of show business for all those years, does that help you?
Yeah.
Are you a better editor having had that?
Well, I can't say if it makes me better, just because not having had that experience of being an editor my whole life, but you know, I was a project manager, so I was in charge of leading large teams of people, which so you have to learn to negotiate and be not political, but negotiate and just kind of work together with teams of people. And in reality, it's very much a team environment. Even the editing, you know, we usually have several editors on an episode. It's a rare show that you actually get to own your own episode. So yeah, I feel like I also learned a lot of problem-solving skills, and as someone, I can't remember, sorry, who mentioned it, but editing is so much, that's what it is, it's problem-solving, and just trying to be creative and look at a creative way to solve a problem.
That's so cool. All right, well, that's all the time we have. I'm so sorry. Thank you for thank you for coming, John. Now, you were a student. You studied this in school.
I went to film school, and I won the ACE Student Editing Award the same year that Rocky won the Oscar. And so at the ceremony, I actually met Richard Halsey, who was winner of that Oscar that year. And he said, sort of bravely, he said, well, if you decide to come out, I'll help you. And I scared him to death, because I immediately said, "Whoa, I'm definitely coming." And I was a projectionist in Mississippi. My dad was in the service, and that's where we were. And I went back, and the projectionist job paid $125 a week, and you also had to be the assistant manager. And the janitor quit, and the janitor got paid $150 a week. So I did both jobs for a couple of months, came out. No one was really interested in hiring me as an assistant, but there were lots of small films. There was a big tax dodge. They were making small films, and so I've worked as an editor exclusively. I've never been an assistant. I rather quickly fell into sound editing, and then, as has been said, you go and you do your independent films on the side. The sound editing paid the money, and that was really a great experience, because worked on a lot of features, and you're seeing these great editors and what they do with their dialogue tracks. And you're not only watching picture all day, you're also studying what they're doing with the dialogue tracks and the performances and how they choose, it looks like it's one take, but it's actually sound from 3 takes. And it was done quite a bit. So I learned a lot there. And in those days, you had to be an assistant for 8 years before you were allowed to be an editor in the union. And by the time that rule changed, and by the time I was able to make the break, it still took me 8 years. I was a sound editor for 8 years. And then I got hired as a second editor on a pilot. That guy left to do a feature. pilot was called Tour of Duty. It got picked up, and then I was mainstream, and the phone just doesn't stop ringing. It's just like everybody here, you know, word gets out, and you know, where it comes.
And I was interested that, you know, it's a lot of it's mostly dramatic work that you do. So
Yeah.
like a nonfiction piece was kind of out of your wheelhouse.
Yeah, I thought this was going to be a 5-week job.
It was, how long was it?
7 months.
Okay.
And it was actually 13 months in production. One of the editors had to leave, and when I got there, they didn't have a single visual effect done after 6 months. They were just building it out and shooting some live stuff. And it was this was a very hard job. It was very complicated.
But there's a tremendous amount of, just in the clip alone, I mean, there wasn't a lot of there was a few things.
That's why I chose that clip, because there's nothing there.
And how did you know how to, but, you know, there was, it kind of handed off so seamlessly, so it would come off of him and then into an effect. Was that all boarded out in advance?
No, it was highly scripted. It was written with descriptions, but it was just built up over that 13 months. It was built up from title cards, and then you would have sort of like a little graphic display, and then you would get just a still photo of the sun over there and stick it in the green screen, and it would build up, and then you'd go off to the visual effects, and you know, you'd go through 12, 13, 14 versions of that, and every time you'd have to retime the dialogue to fit what you've got.
Was the Neil Tyson stuff, was that the last thing to shoot? Did you have all?
That was the first thing.
So you had to know how that was all going to hand off to effects and where you were going to go?
Not really, no. No, you know, that was just like those down shots. They were just down on a green floor, and we had to decide what size he was going to be. We'll put all those moves in ourselves, and all those moves in the visual effects really were done by us. And it's just a gradual thing. As I look at it now, I don't know how we did it. I really don't. And we did all 13 episodes at one time. So there was always something to do, and always
And you were the only editor, you said?
No, there were 3 editors.
Oh, okay.
3 in all, but only 2 at the same time.
Got it.
So, you know, yeah, you would be looking at an episode, and then you would hit 3 minutes of title cards with voiceover, you know, and it's like, okay, what are we doing here? Oh, well, we got to go stock footage, we got to do this, we got to do that. Visual effects, we were sort of making it up as we went. Although the script always said what to do. It didn't say how to do it. Near the end, there were a lot of what I would call junior producers, because we were scrambling to get done, and we had to fill in these holes. And so these 3 young men came to me, and they said, we're having trouble with this sequence. It's only like 20 seconds, but we don't know what to do. I said, what does the script say? They go, oh, we forget. So I said, let me see the script. And I looked at it, and I said, I think I see your problem. An unimaginable alien vision. And so they said, you know, old man, what do we do? And I said, go back to the writer and see if you can get her to imagine it.
I wanted to ask you guys, kind of as a group, and we can, you know, guys jump in or I can referee it. But there's a couple of things I'm really interested in, and one of them is preserving your vision. You know, you guys are, you know, the first people to touch it and the last people to touch it. But there's a lot of opinions. You know, you get your cut, the director's cut, the studio's cut, the network's cut, the second studio cut, the third network cut. You were saying maybe at Jimmy it's compressed and it's not like that. And I would imagine, Kent, to some extent, it really was Billy's vision. I don't know how much HBO was involved, but how are you able to preserve what you bring to it, you know, your vision, in the midst of all these layers? And maybe Shannon, you can talk about that a little bit first, just on a episodic show. You know, there's a lot of hands on every cut, and how do you kind of keep your vision alive?
Because I always weasel what I want back. No, but.
But is it just being persuasive and really advocating for what you want, or?
Luckily, I've worked on, I mean, the 2 series, Californication and Orange is the New Black, have very strong showrunners. and there's one person in charge, really. So I don't know, my editor's cut, the editor's cut is much closer to what the producers want, usually, than what the director
I was going to ask you, is the
That's
director's
kind of
cut
what
just a necessary detour into oblivion,
Well,
or what? I mean, it's okay. I mean, it's all right. Let's be honest. I'd love to know. No, I mean,
No, you see, I actually really like working with the directors, and they have a viewpoint, and sometimes you can save some of that if it's not too much off track of the, the whole series has to look like it's a series. It can't be,
course,
have
right.
somebody's interpretation in the middle.
But like in an episode, so you were doing the first season. So I would imagine you had no idea the phenomenon it would become.
No, none at all. They'd have no idea.
And also you don't quite, I would imagine throughout that first season, you're still kind of finding it.
Yes.
So is that with you and Genji, like was that the process of just finding what the show was, or did she know out of the gate what it was going to be? She knows.
She's amazing, and she has her whole team of writers, and they were a lot of them kind of younger, newer writers, but everyone got their scripts to write and everything, and she just comes in and does her version over the top, and puts her stamp on it, and it's very easy to follow what she wants. But after a while, if you sit in the room, you start hearing, there's Mark Burley, who's her head producer, and there's the lead writer, and there's Genji, and they're the ones that are really in for the cut. And you start hearing what bothers them, about different actors' performances or whatever. So if the director is putting those ones in, I'll try to, tell them that no, they don't like the really dramatic.
Right. You kind of
like
steer
that
them.
kind of thing. Try to play it down. But if they want to do it, I let them do it. But I always keep my version because, mine is usually funnier and usually has the performances that I know they'll want. And basically, that's what she's about is funny. Like you can make it as dramatic as you want, but she'll put the funny stuff back in.
And then through the process, is it just being kind of dogged about the things that you really believe in and kind of championing those throughout the process?
Yes and no. I'd have to feel really strongly. I mean, I'm not going to argue with Genji about what she likes, and I wouldn't get anywhere anyway. But I just try. I do it more through, through the cutting and through the interpretation of the material, I guess. The sort of stuff that they might not even really notice that I'm doing, but that's the stuff that I get really attached to more than anything else, probably. So if I can preserve all those little things and the transitions I like and all that stuff.
So it's almost maybe some of the things that you really love are almost invisible to them. They'll be talking about the performance here, or the camera angle there, but you've built a sequence that they don't even recognize.
I put it back in, they never notice.
And Chris, I would imagine, you're obviously working with a very clear vision, strong showrunner. Is that similar, your relationship with Vince working on Breaking Bad?
Oh yeah, well, and for me, there's another challenge in that, I'm being given an opportunity and co-editing with someone, and so when that first started happening, I would have an idea, but I would second guess my own idea because I would think, well, am I supposed to cut it the way that I think the show is cut, or the way she would cut it, or the way, and was fortunately quickly given the guidance, just trust your instincts. I'll tell you if it's not working. And that has worked really well. But Vince is a guy who is, as everybody's heard, probably the nicest guy in the world, and is so collaborative and so open to input. I mean, ultimately, yes, it's his show and it's going to be the way he wants it, but he really wants strong opinions to say, well, here's an alternative, or here's a thing that I think would really work. And he's very collaborative that way. Absolutely. When you say that.
Oh, absolutely.
And do you find that the choices you made that really meant a lot to you, do those live on, or do you fight for those, or how do you kind of maintain your vision of those beats throughout?
There were some things, and again, I mean, I keep going back to Kelly because being given this really marvelous opportunity to demonstrate what I could do, and there was once the scene, the clip that we showed.
Yeah, great. It was a great sequence.
I love that sequence, and there was one particular part where I mean, there's definitely some shots that I fought for to keep in there because there's one was a little bit of a focus buzz, and they thought, no, I don't know if we can do that. It's like I think we have to use this shot because just emotionally, it's the right one. But there was one part where there was footage that was shot separately of the hands actually coming through the bars, like from a ground level.
Yeah.
And it didn't really match what they did. I mean, the timing and the placement of the hands. And I didn't use it, and Kelly said, yeah, you have to use a shot. And I was like, it doesn't match. She said, don't make me come out there and do it myself. Figure it out. And to her credit, I figured it out. I figured out a way to, cheat it to make it seem like it was. But if you really are, going frame by frame, because I don't know, I guess you have nothing else to do. And frame by frame, there's some issues, but yeah, and then and Vince he'll tell you also if it's not working for him. He'll say, let me see that other version, let me see that, and but once he makes a decision, this is the other thing that you take away from a guy like that. Once he makes that decision, he moves on, and like once an episode is locked, especially, it's done. It's completely done.
Skip, I'd love to hear about your process of Fargo, only because there's this immensely popular movie also. So that's another layer of notes or another vision that you have to kind of contend with. And how much did that guide you, and how much did you want to create your own thing on the show?
Well, yes, we used the movie kind of as a guide to try to keep some of that intact, but I had conversations with the showrunner, Noah, and it's like he had his own ideas, like let's stay in the wide shots, let's stay in the 2 shots longer than you normally would. So you kind of build, going through the dailies, you kind of build these things out the way that I felt worked very well, and hopefully in the same place that Noah wanted to end up. And you do fight for things in the end, and there were times when Noah said, well, let's stay in this 2 shot even longer than you have. And it's just, my vision was close to what he is, because having the conversations with him and stuff, you hope that you get into the same place that they ultimately want to be. And then you have less fighting to do, hopefully. And it's the process of what their vision is for what you've done. And the closer you can get to it, the longer you're working on a show with the same people, ultimately
you can anticipate
where it's going to be going. But this was the new show. This hadn't been done before. And it was people I hadn't worked with before, so I'm trying to communicate with them ahead of time, get their input and some information. A lot of people say, I don't want it, you put it together and let's see how it looks.
And because you were creating a show, it was very early on, did the showrunners, like Genji, did they know right off the bat what they wanted it to be, or were you finding it with them and with the directors as well?
I think a lot of the time they had a clear vision of where they wanted to go, but that's where, when I come in, I try things that they might not necessarily have thought of, and they might like something I've done or not, and then that's when the collaboration comes in. You get to work with them and try to figure out what their input is, or their thoughts and their ideas, and you try to create that for them.
It does feel like it's kind of own piece. It doesn't feel like the movie at all, really, in the performances and in the way it's put together. You guys set out from the beginning to kind of make it, like, how did you weigh, like, tipping your hat? I know there was, I love the show, and there's a White Russian sign and a wood chipper, like, in the background. Like, how much did you, like, nod to the original?
Well, they did a lot of that throughout the show, and even like the scene that was here today, the dying scene they used from No Country for Old Men. They kind of wanted to put the little homage to the Coen brothers.
Right.
And there were little moments like that throughout the whole show. So it was just those little things just to kind of throw tidbits to the audience who are the big Coen brother fans, that they're trying to keep things alive from all the movies.
And then Jason, we touched on a little bit. I would imagine just because of the compressed time, your vision is what's on for the most part.
Somewhat. I mean, but you're working, you kind of have a little bit of time before the director. The director may still be shooting part of the bit while you're starting to cut it, so you get some chances to get your choices in there. I mean, ultimately, you're all sort of funneling and trying to distill Jimmy's vision. And we've all been there for a very long time. So there's 3 directors that have all been with Jimmy a long time. So yeah, ultimately we're going for what he wants, because he's just just like, you know, Vince and Genji, it's like they all have their things that they kind of fixate on, their styles, their take. So there's lots of, you know, things Jimmy doesn't like to use, so you kind of steer away from that. And sometimes if we have like a fill-in director or a new director, you kind of have to kind of steer them away from that and just not put something in. But yeah, because of compressed schedule, you don't really have time to sort of say, let's try it this way, let's try it that way. You know, sometimes you sort of, I mean, I get like selective deafness and just kind of just keep cutting and cut it my way and be like, you know, while they're saying, let's try this, I'm like, sure. And then just like, what do you think about this? And like, oh, that works too. And then great, moving on. You know, you do like the editing Jedi mind trick. You just basically just hit the keys really fast and really loud. And then, you know, but you didn't really do anything. You're like, what do you think of that? I like it. Great, moving on. So, you know.
I'm so sorry I'm here. This is awful. This is terrible. I've known too much.
Yeah. But most of the time you're trying to your cut is sort of what ends up going on. Just you don't have the time. On the day of bits, it's sort of like, yeah, this is how you want to put it together. I mean, and then there's also, because a lot of our day of bits are sort of like taking an existing news clip or creating a movie trailer, you don't have a huge amount of leverage to go that far off in that, very differently from it. It's like you kind of have to work within the confines of the material you're spoofing, you know? I mean, and then combined with the limited amount of time. So you can't like do something too outlandish for a movie trailer because you're still essentially telling a joke. So you've got setup, you know, and punchline you've got to get to. So you can't divert too much from that.
I think that sense of the compressed schedule, I feel, just gives you such a voice. It's great.
Yeah.
When you say different directors, do you mean like for the segment pieces?
Yeah.
You have a pretty consistent guy who does the live show.
Yeah, I mean, up until recently, right now they're trying out some new directors, but yeah, our director for like the longest time, for 3 or 4 years it was Bobcat Goldthwait, so he was awesome to work with, and then after him was another great director named Joe DeMeo, and then after that for 2 or 3 years was one of our former editors, this guy Andy Fisher, who is fantastic because he was an editor. During the writer's strike, he was basically editing with us. He was actually just doing just the monologue bits, just the clips, just pulling, you know, dumb clips from the internet and reality shows, et cetera, et cetera. But he was shooting little things on the side. And then during the writer's strike, he decided, you know what, I'm not going to come back. And so they hired another editor to fill in for him. But then a few months later, one of our other directors was leaving, and they convinced Jimmy to bring him back as a director. So he started directing a lot of our most popular bits and things like that. And then Jimmy was looking to translate some of that into the live show. So that same sort of edginess, they hired Andy to then direct the live show. And for like 3 years, he directed a live show, and he would put these little nuggets to try and, you know, put the talk show on edge, like, you know, just ridiculous bumpers, just whatever he can kind of work in, while also shooting bits like Movie the Movie, and you know, we did some spoofs of like The Informant with Matt Damon, and just whatever bits he would do with Jimmy on the side.
And you've been directing as well.
Yeah, there was a time when they were looking for some other field directors, so we, you know, kind of stepped up and say, hey, what about giving us a shot? And so, you know, yeah, got to do a bunch of different weird stuff over the course of a couple of months, which, you know, like I said, it's like, you know, it's good to be on the other end of that. You know, because right now, like I said, we get the last chunk. It was good, you get roped right in at the very beginning. You're like, okay, here's your script. We want to do this. You know, one of the bits was Obama was giving a speech about how bad the economy was. And so the pitch was, while he's giving the speech, they should come in and start pulling away his podium and taking the flag out and just being like, just
repossessing
sort of
everything.
repoing the whole, and I'm like, all right, well, how do we do this? And so, you know, we had a limited amount of time, and so we ended up just we have 5 great graphics guys. We said, we want to roto out Obama's head for this 20-second chunk, and we're going to get a double, and we're just going to recreate the entire set. And so we did that, and we basically put money in his pocket and just started doing different things, and they started just pulling while they sort of rotoed this face onto this other guy in the course of like 2 hours.
Wow.
So.
And did you have to cut it?
No. We had while we were trying out as directors, me and James Crow, one of our other, you know, editors, they brought in another editor to fill in.
So you would shoot it, and then someone else would edit your stuff. That's great, isn't
Yeah.
it great? You just be like, shoot it, and someone else will.
Yeah.
It's great.
You know, it's a little bit of a release, but also when you're looking at the compressed schedule, you're like, you know, if the editor that you're working with isn't as, you know, translating as fast as you can. You're like, you just want to go, all right, get out of the seat. Just, you know.
Right.
Luckily,
Right.
that never had to happen.
Good.
But, you know, yeah, you're just, luckily you don't have to cut your own stuff.
And then Ken, for your vision for the 700 Sundays, I mean, is that true? I would imagine like a strong showrunner, Billy was kind of the guy. So how was it a pretty clear translation of how your vision of the show to what ended up being on television?
Billy and I have worked together a lot over the years, and we're very comfortable with each other. We're on the same page in terms of the comedy and the emotional beats, and he trusts me. And
You were brave enough to pitch cuts.
yeah. So, and HBO was great. They were super supportive. They totally left us alone. You know, they looked at our cut once we were done, gave very minimal notes, and that was that. So, yeah, it was really a pleasure.
Yeah.
It was a lot of fun.
And Emily, I feel like on reality shows, there's so much footage that's shot. I would imagine that your vision really sustains throughout the process, or is that? I mean, how do you go? How do you kind of keep your vision of what you want? How you want to tell the story of the episode? I feel like and as a reality editor, you're a writer also to a large extent.
Well, to a certain extent we are. We're watching a lot of footage, and typically too, we're working with story producers who will help us with, you're given kind of the roadmap per se.
So like they've marked stuff and said, check out this or look at this.
Yeah, sometimes you'll even get a string, you'll get a string out and you'll work from that, but then you supplement and you add and you go into the footage and find stuff. But you'll be given, you'll know what the major beats of the episode are. On this show, we knew what the major events were going to be, but we were on a really compressed schedule. So, and actually the story support, we basically started on a Thursday and we had our first cut to the network a week from Monday. So, it's a really, really fast compressed schedule. It was originally supposed to be the 4th episode and it got moved to the 1st position. So this happened very quickly. And so we also didn't have the normal kind of story support that you might have on a reality show.
So you have to introduce all the characters now being in episode 1 that you didn't have to do.
Oh, well, each episode is just it's one-off.
Okay.
It's 2 characters, so it's not a continuation. So yeah, the first act you have to introduce them and do all this stuff. But the point being, there wasn't, like a lot of times when you'll start a show, you'll have a string out or you'll have a paper map or a paper cut or something that kind of gives you a roadmap of where to go. And with this episode, we really didn't have that. So it really was a case of us kind of going into the footage more than maybe we normally would to find, the gems and the pieces that we were going to use to tell the major points, plot points, and get us from one place to another, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
Okay.
And this was, how many hours of footage did you have for your?
Well, this was 21 days of footage. It was mostly shot.
For like an hour show.
Yeah, for a 42-minute show, 42 and a half minutes
Wow.
of program time. And it was
21 days?
Yeah, 21 days. They weren't rolling the whole time, and it was actually mostly single cam, although on the first day when they were dropped off in the jungle, I think there were 2 cameras. Other than that, it was single cam, but the participants had diary cameras, which they then supplemented when the camera crew wasn't around. They had their own diary cameras, which they would talk into and record things. And then we also had a GoPro, which just caught different things. At some points it was just mounted at the shelter. Sometimes it went underwater, whatever. But yeah, it was 21 days of footage, and it wasn't logged, and it wasn't because of the fast turnaround. Like the footage, I believe it came in a week before we started editing it. So like interviews weren't even transcribed. Usually you'll have interviews that are transcribed so you can quickly hunt for what you need to help tell your story. So it was a lot, which is one of the reasons the show is challenging.
That's incredible.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh. So John, I mean, it sounds like with the amount of effects and animations, and I'm sure those previs and imagining the unimaginable, you had to do, I would imagine, a lot of your vision as you were cutting. How would you work that in? I mean, would you be able to communicate and say, this is the kind of animation we need? Would you talk to the visual effects guys?
Well, yeah, it's studying placeholders.
Yeah,
Everything is a placeholder.
And how much of those placeholders, so many times placeholders really help shape what ultimately comes in there. So how much of those placeholders kind of live in terms of concept?
All of it.
Yeah.
Yeah, all of it. Never did we hand it off and say, bring us back a pretty picture, we'll make it work. But it wasn't like that at all. It was very structured. We had, and it was a little old school, we had a screening room, sat about 15 people, and we would look at an episode every day to see how we were progressing, and then we would have, starting about 6 months before the end, we had visual effects viewings and note sessions every day. So we were in the screening room twice a day with 3 or 4 producers and the editors, and Anne Drillian, who wrote it and produced it, and really it was pre-visualized by her.
Wow.
And she worked on it for 7 years. So she had very specific ideas about what she wanted. And then, but we just had to, I mean, literally take still photos off the internet, draw pictures, do lots of avid moves, you know, pan, move, zoom, zoom. Start out with, like that sequence there was probably started out as just a black field of stars. Some of that was actual stock footage, and a lot of it is also actual photographs that have been 3-dimensionalized. And how they do it, I don't know. But so you'd send it out, and it would come back to you, and instead of being a flat photo, it would be 3-dimensionalized, and it would move inside and move around. So that looked a lot better than the still photo.
But you would have the opportunity as you were putting it together to say, that we need something like this.
Oh yeah. Oh, I mean, yeah. It's
That's amazing. So you were
changing.
doing a lot of writing almost for that.
Well, I wouldn't say writing. It's about pacing. It's about pacing and, you know, how. It was a real tricky thing on this show because if you got too slow, it seemed like you were educational. And if you got too fast, you couldn't grab it, you know, just.
So you were trying to straddle the line between
outta
being
here.
entertaining
Yeah,
and
so,
being...
yeah, you had to find just the exact right pace, when to do the pauses, the breaks, when to have a little picture show, you know, and we had a research team that provided us with stock footage. We would just tell them basically what we want, and a bin of like 15 really great looking shots would come and make a montage out of it, and run it at the screening, get some notes, do the same thing all over again.
God, that's amazing.
For 7 months.
It just feels like it's so daunting having all this raw footage that you have to start, you know? You have to start somewhere. And what do you do first? You know, like you have so much material, 21 days of material. What do you do first?
Well,
But you just start, I mean, you can't watch everything. Do you look
no,
at the
you don't watch
logs, or what do
everything.
you?
Yeah, exactly. We looked at logs, and actually, in our case, our lead editor, Chris Meyer, who I see over there, he started on this episode a couple of days beforehand, and I can't remember if it was with our supervising field producer or not, but they basically went through the logs and pulled bunches of selects of areas that we knew that we wanted to hit. But it was a really, you know, it was like a 5-hour string out, kind of the high points. And so we start from that, building scenes and, you know, thinking about the story points and the story arc and the character arcs and all that. And then just as you need stuff, match into the footage and look for additional things that illustrate your points and interview bites and that kind of thing.
And this show is unique. You were saying there's not many cameras. So if you want something, you don't have you don't have multiple takes or a lot of angles. That's the footage.
No, that's the footage, and that's one of the reasons I actually chose that particular clip for this audience is that, you know, a lot of times you really have to fill in reality with footage that's not necessarily of the scene. So in that particular scene, like when she is watching the turtle and dives into the water and so on, you know, that's actually footage from different times. And if you look closely, you'll see when she's on the rock, she's not wearing a camera, but when she goes in the water, she's got a camera, you know, and so it's kind of...
and would those be picked up, like, would those notes come from you?
They weren't pickups, like they weren't planned. It was just on another day she caught a turtle and she went in with the GoPro, they put it in a... you know, so they weren't,
I see.
you know, it wasn't like we're gonna do this scene. It was more like, it was just kind of, this
somewhere else.
was like a like I've never worked on a show that was so, like truly a docu-follow, like they really just kind of went out there and followed these people and saw what they did. So, but yeah, so when the footage came back, we just kind of had to find places where you could illustrate and fill in for the audience what happened. So that's actually probably footage from like 4 different days, just that whole sequence of her going into the water, getting the turtle and coming out with the turtle. You know, you can kind of see it, and then there's different footage or from a different event of her walking off the path. That's a different, you know, event, but she caught turtles. You know, that's what she did, and she caught that turtle in particular, and they ate it. They had been starving. They had burned down the shelter the night before, and it was a real low point, and this was a high point. And
So you were able to kind of, and do you use like VO and to help blend
yeah, you do use VO. This, also I chose the sequence because there's not really VO. There was one piece of ADR, so additional dialogue recording that Shane did that we got by telephone, I think, just to kind of help sell that, you know, just to fill in a little bit about that story and how he was feeling in his state of mind.
anyone from the audience? Yes. What do you have?
Hey, I have 2 questions. The first is a little bit technical, but each one of you works in a different style. I just want to know, like, for someone who's starting in the career, what kind of programs would you say is like the best as a starting point, and then to, you know, escalate from that?
I mean, I'm an Avid guy, so I kind of still feel it's even from the basic level to everything you can do to it. It's a great way to get into it and start. And you know, you could sit down and be editing on Avid within a half an hour. You know, there's not a lot of manuals and levels. It's like, you know, once you can get past figuring out how to capture, once you can get something on a timeline, you can pretty much start cutting it. So I would say you start working on that, you know, working with Avid when you can.
Yeah, I think the Avid's the way to go because I think most companies use that now. I think Final Cut
Final Cut's evolved into something different that I guess, I don't know anybody who's really working with Final Cut X in a show environment, but.
No, I don't think so.
No, Avid, definitely.
Yeah.
Although I would say use whatever you can get your hands on.
Right.
You know, if you can't afford Avid or if you can't, although they've got a new thing.
Yeah,
right,
is
where
Avid
it's
available
subscription.
to consumers?
Subscriptions.
Oh yeah,
Yeah.
definitely.
It's not that
Consumer version, and if you're a student, the educational version is like dirt cheap. So, but I mean, yeah. But the thing is, like, I don't think the editing program makes the editor. I mean, I think any of these guys could sit down on any edit system, and once they figure out the tools, so it's not necessarily the program. It's, you know,
It's about the storytelling.
it's about the storytelling, being able to figure out how to take a big mountain of footage and distill it down to, you know, your vision, then the director's vision, and then everybody, you know, the best version of it.
So kind of you use what you have, kind of
Right.
hone your craft on that, and you can learn
Right.
any system, or hone your craft on.
But I would say that there are some differences. I mean, I did 2.5 seasons on a Monk on Final Cut, and it makes you guess. You know, Avid, you can find your right frame using JKL keys, and you can't do this with the Final Cut. So you wind up guessing, and then you get in the habit of guessing.
I would also say that since Avid is used most, why not use that? And the price has come down quite a bit, and I don't know what Final Cut is these days. And then I've heard Premiere is sort of becoming more used a lot more recently, taking the place of Final Cut.
Yeah.
But I don't
I've
have
heard as well.
experience with that.
Right.
My second question is about those of you who worked in reality shows. Is a lot of it scripted, or is it an actual reality show?
That's always such an interesting question. It's not scripted, but there's a difference. You know, some shows are what you would call produced, more produced, heavily produced. But still, what the contestants or participants are saying, it's not, you know, okay. I guess on some shows, it depends on the show.
Don't spoil it. Don't spoil it.
There are certainly shows where in an interview people might be told, you know, or asked nicely to say something. So yeah, that does happen. But I don't think, but I think, you know, it really depends on what network is and what show it is. Like I think it's NBC, I have to sign a clause saying I won't alter the intent of what the participants, you know, feel and say. So, and like at the BBC, you're definitely not supposed to do anything like that. And I think always when you're working on these shows, you know, your intent is to be as true and accurate to what they, what their real feelings and opinions. But questions are asked in interviews that are specific questions that the producers want an answer a certain way, so that certainly, but yeah, it's not scripted per se.
Having said that, I have friends who are story producers who have spent 6 weeks in a writer's room before they've shot a reality show, and they basically have beat it out. So it's like a weird hybrid of scripted and unscripted.
My name's Chris Temple. I'm actually a documentary director. I was just wondering, from your guys' perspective, what advice would you give us to make your life as easy as possible, or any pet peeves that you have that you hate directors for? This might go on for a while.
Use slates.
Slates, yeah. It's interesting. I think a lot of people, even on sets, even on big sets, a lot of people don't know what the slate is actually for. They don't know, they just see like, in movies, they go, mark it, like that, and they don't know that that's a sync point,
right.
And that you would use that maybe if if by some chance always the metadata is wrong, or the time code didn't jam exactly properly, so it's a frame or two out. And they don't know that it necessarily that in the editing room you would use it as an ID, which it seems very simple, but I guess if you don't learn it, use slates.
Yeah, we've had shoots where they've used slates, but then they would go to each camera like this, and then they so ultimately our assistants are then just like, all right, they're finding some other noise that somebody makes. They become really adept at just finding the most random sound in order to sync. When we do like a hidden camera, there'll be 5 or 6 and different cameras, lipsticks, maybe a GoPro, and they've become geniuses at figuring out sync points for hours of footage.
I feel like I've been working too hard as a director if all I need to do is get a good slate. I feel like I've been putting way too much thought into everything. That's very comforting.
I have one, although I don't know that it applies to documentary necessarily. In fact, it's the opposite. But it would be to cut the camera between takes and not necessarily roll for 30 minutes. Then do like 18 performances of the same scene or the same line over and over again, because it wears out your actors. Most importantly, it also, you forget as a director, you forget where you were, and you forget if you got the beginning part of a scene, or if you did it more than once. And then when it comes to the editing room, you find out, oh, but I've got all these different performances, but really you have one usable take of this one line in this one shot, and that's all. And so it's like working around that. So I think that even though it does break the momentum a little bit on a set, and it's crazy on a set. You're racing against time and your life trying to actually make this thing happen. But I would recommend cutting and then starting again and resetting, basically.
How about over here?
Thanks.
Hi, hello. I'm also a prospective editor here, and I think it was Walter Murch that said once that the editors are the guardians of the performance. And I wanted to ask you guys, what are some of the ways that you find are the most useful to discover that best performance, or how do you decide on, for example, very similar takes? What tricks do you have for somebody who's just starting out to discover those best performances and making the best cut that you can make?
I think a lot of it depends on the actor. Some actors give you a wide range of emotions and whatever beats, and some actors don't. And the ones that don't are obviously more of a challenge to work with, because oftentimes you have to create a performance from many different takes. But the important thing is to have a strong point of view as to what you think the performance should be and where you think it should be going, and let that be your guide. That's what I've always done. And watch your dailies, all of it. That also sounds simple, but you really have to watch everything, even the stuff that isn't the lines, because a lot of times you'll find moments that aren't scripted, or that aren't even an intentional performance that oh my, I need that. So it's true. Sometimes you can take things out of context to make them work really well in that kind of situation. Yeah, definitely.
Over here on this side.
My last name does happen to be Slate.
We need more of you.
Every set.
the Emmy website, and I was just wondering, Shannon, if you could talk a little bit about why you chose the clip that you did.
It was one that I could find that was only 3 minutes long. No. Also, it was the end of the episode, and it was a real turning point. It was an example of what they do at the end of the show to hook you in for the next episode, because in this case, you know, Piper is this manipulative, passive-aggressive person who always wants to be the favorite and sweet, and was covering up her affair with her girlfriend in prison to her fiance, you know. So she finally gets up the guts to confess everything, and then he turns the tables and has this piece of information where now she's got to hate her after she's just confessed. So it's that kind of thing, you know, like everyone's hanging on their relationship who watches the show, and then all of a sudden, what's going to happen? We have to watch the next one. So it was more that sort of reason that I did it.
What over here?
Yeah, I'm a composer. I do a lot of TV and film, and I had a question. I think a lot of people don't realize that the editors not only edit the picture, but you guys are like the final composers, editing all the music and putting the music in the right place and changing things. And I was wondering if you had any thoughts on things that help you, or things you find that were a real hindrance as far as music when you get delivered.
I usually find that if we have music that's done by the composer, that's in the tone of the show, works better. When you try to use soundtracks and other music, it just doesn't fit the way that it's supposed to. So that makes it tough for us. But actually on Fargo, we had music that was scored by the composer that we were using, and it fit the mood and fit the style of the show, and that just makes it easier. And because you'll spend a lot of time with soundtracks editing the music to try to make it fit a scene. So that's the toughest part of the music.
I often find too that it's the easiest note to give. If you're an executive and you don't kind of know what to say, you can always go to the music, you know? So that's challenging.
Yeah, I mean, toughest for us, we only use stock music because there's no time, obviously, for anybody to compose anything. So it's a lot of times the stock libraries are just more like you find a great beginning and there's maybe a great end, and then in the middle of the track is just the same monotonous loop over and over again because someone's built it as an underscore. So you're like, oh, you're constantly pulling your hair out because you're like, oh, this would be a great track to use, but it doesn't go anywhere. So a lot of times you have to figure out a way to maybe blend it with another track, and you're ultimately trying to mimic, something else. So it's like you're also then hamstrung because you've got one hand tied behind your back because you're trying to find something that sounds just like, I don't know, the soundtrack to Pirates of the Caribbean for a parody of it, but it's like, oh, just there's nothing here. So you ultimately, and then yes, it is the easiest thing to give the note. The music doesn't work. And then it's back to the drawing board, like, so many times it's been the music doesn't work. Well, what should it be? I don't know. Well, they're like, all right, do you see what time it is? Okay, we're gonna go figure this out. But ultimately, we always do. So somehow we make it work. It's like, yeah.
You have to get creative and jam together pieces of music that might not necessarily go together, but you have to kind of make it work. And
different tracks, or sometimes there's, different elements of a different track you can layer over top of each other. Maybe get lucky they're the same beats, and they'll build on a team. Same key, maybe not so much. But yeah, but they work enough.
Hi, my name is Chris Watkins. First of all, I'd like to thank you all for your time today. And I'm a prospective, I wanted a career in editing, and so I'm trying to stick with it. But it's kind of a vague question, but if you could give one single piece of advice to an up-and-coming editor, both as far as editing and networking goes, what would that advice be?
Persistence.
Yeah, keep hanging out, man. Just keep going back. Be the guy in the hallway that they can grab at a moment's notice, because someday they'll need somebody right now.
Mm-hmm.
And let that be you.
I think in hearing everyone's stories, like everyone here has a lot of moxie. Like someone hung out on Cassavetes set long enough to like get a job, or cold called a production company, or was going to the trades looking for people. Like, I think, just go get it.
They don't know what you do. They don't.
How important is it that an editor learn visual effects programs such as After Effects, and is that the top program you should know, or is there something better?
I think it's a good tool to have. I don't think it's essential, but it's definitely good to have a palette of tools.
It's good to have a working knowledge of it, enough to kind of, you want enough to be dangerous, but not enough to be able also to be able to communicate with the people doing the work. So you can be sort of on the same page with them, other than just be like, yeah, I know you do graphics, just I want this to do here. Yeah, use that button, do that. But if you can definitely give them a little bit more of an in-depth knowledge, you don't have to do it yourself, but you have to basically be able to communicate it. It's helpful to know these different programs.
It's also a way in. If you do know it well enough, then you can get hired on as that person, and then you'll get to know the editing room and the editing crew and get yourself moved up.
The cutting rooms are evolving too, and a lot of cutting rooms become kind of hybrid editing and visual effects houses. I worked on RIPD, and all we were doing was doing temp visual effects. They had previs still working deep into post, they called it post-viz, which is not a real word. Post-visual it doesn't make sense. So it's absolutely, I would highly recommend learning it because it'll help you. It'll help you get jobs too.
As someone who's just moved here, I was an assistant in Vancouver on a few features, but a lot of people tell me that television and features are very different paths, and you should sort of choose one and go for one or the other. Do you guys feel like those paths are merging a little more now, or they're still very separate worlds?
I think they are different worlds. There's a different circle of people. Certainly there are people that live in both worlds, but they're different. They don't go to the same parties.
I would say it depends what kind of life you want to have. Because, there are TV shows that are insane with the hours and stuff, but with a movie, a lot of times it becomes your whole life for a really long period of time, and it's like was just said, they hang in very different circles, and you become very tight with a certain group of people, and those are the people who you'll get your next jobs from. And so I guess it's sort of deciding kind of I worked in movie, I've done both as an assistant, and it definitely can be tricky. The best advice is to network with as many people as you can, and don't piss them off, and show them that you're a really, really hard worker. That's the best thing, and that you're good also. Hopefully you're good. That's the best thing to be, is good. Don't be a dick. That's right.
I think we have time for one more question, if anyone has anything else. Thank you.
I'm curious what the working, not conditions, but the environments are for the different genres. I kind of know what it's like in reality TV, but I'm very curious in particular about scripted. Do you guys, is it a big playtime kind of thing? Do you guys hang out after work, or is it like you go to work, you don't talk to anybody outside? Just curious that.
No, in television, during the day, you take breaks, you talk to everybody, but it depends on how busy you are with your show. Some days I may leave at 7 or 8 o'clock. Kelly may stay till 9 or 10, so there isn't a lot of interaction. Midnight, well. But it depends on the workflow of the show. Some days you may just be so swamped you don't get to even come out of your bay. Other times you don't have heavy days, so you get the chance to walk around and catch up with everybody.
I find it to be a very hostile environment. No, it is. It's great. It's way more friendly than most of the movies that I've worked on or been around. Definitely.
On Orange is the New Black, it's very laid back because it's Netflix. We don't have air dates. We do have deadlines because we still have to, have the director in the room. We still have to finish the show and the sound and all that stuff, but and keep the episodes going because they're shooting the whole time. You're still doing 9 days each episode, and you're going to be doing every third show, so you have to move it along. But it's one of the most, relaxed things I've ever done. It's really great. You just have to get your, as an assistant, for instance, I'm a little more high maintenance because I do script sync too. So they're busy all day. They're busy all day. But
Thank you. I love script sync.
but it's really nice. You know, you have lovely lunch and you come in at 10. And it's nice.
But it's still the same kind of windowless room with a couch in the back and a floor lamp.
Yeah.
I mean, really, it's really, they're all horrible. I mean, the room is still the room, right?
Well, it's funny, at Kimmel, we're on the second floor of the El Capitan Theater. And
oh, that's cool.
Yeah, but there's still just 3 windowless rooms. But I think it was like our second year there, we noticed there's like a little window behind a grate up in the corner. And we're like, oh, cool, there's sunlight coming in. And then it was like 9 o'clock at night, and I realized there's sunlight coming in. I'm like, wait, it's not even a real window. You know? And to the point where actually Jimmy bought all of the editors these little sun lamp things that you put on the floor, these like UV lights to get like natural sunlight. So we all like turn them on every once in a while, just in his honor. But it's like just because he knows from like his days, like his early days at the show, his office was down in the bottom level of the theater. So he actually was in a bigger windowless room.
Right.
He knew how much it made him crazy. So he actually bought all of us these like UV lights so we can like turn them on every once in a while to get sunlight. And I'm like, we do go outside every once in a while, but, you know, not much.
All right, well, thank you guys for coming, and thank you and congratulations to our panelists. Thank you for coming. Good luck. And thank you to the PGC, and to you guys. Thanks a lot. Hope you enjoyed the show. Okay, good.